Morning light touched the city's tallest buildings, bouncing off the glass doors of Prestige Motors, the most famous luxury car showroom in town. Inside, everything smelled like money and power. Shiny marble floors reflected the glow of expensive headlights, and salesmen in fine suits smiled only when they saw people who looked rich. It was a place where every car cost more than a house, and every customer was treated like royalty. If they looked the part, Marcus stood at the entrance for a moment. Taking a deep breath, he wasn't dressed poorly, but his clothes were simple: a clean white shirt, a tie that had seen better days, and shoes that were polished but old. His eyes were full of admiration as he looked at the shining cars inside. He had worked hard all his life, saved every bit he could, and today was the day he wanted to see if his dream of owning a luxury car could come true. When he stepped in, the soft hum of conversation dropped slightly. Not completely, but enough for him to feel it. A few heads turned, some whispers followed. Marcus walked straight toward a beautiful silver car displayed under bright lights. He smiled quietly, imagining how it would feel to drive it. One of the salesmen, a tall man named Mr. Dalton, noticed him and frowned. Dalton's sharp eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe. He saw the shirt, the worn tie, the dark skin, and instantly decided that Marcus didn't belong there. Dalton forced a polite smile and walked over, his shoes clicking sharply on the floor. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth but cold. Marcus nodded kindly and said, "Yes, I was wondering if I could take a look at this model, maybe even check its features." His tone was soft and respectful. Dalton chuckled under his breath, pretending to fix his cufflinks. "Sir, these cars start at $300,000, he said, emphasizing the number. "Maybe you'd prefer something more affordable?" Marcus looked confused for a second, then smiled again. "That's fine. I just wanted to see what makes it so special," he said. Walking a little closer, the manager's face tightened. Dalton didn't like that Marcus wasn't embarrassed. He felt his control slipping around them. Another customer in a designer suit looked up from a cup of coffee, smirking as if enjoying the moment. Dalton's tone turned firm. "Sir, I think you should leave. This area is for serious buyers only." Marcus blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "I'm a serious buyer," he replied calmly. "I came here to look at a car." But Dalton stepped closer, his fake smile gone now. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." His voice had that tone people use when they want to sound polite while being cruel. The security guard at the door noticed the exchange and started walking toward them. Marcus looked around. Other staff members were watching, pretending to be busy. Some customers were whispering. One woman raised her eyebrows as if to say, he should know better. No one spoke up. Not one person told Dalton to stop. Marcus took a slow breath. He could feel the sting of humiliation burning inside, but he didn't want a scene. He said softly, "All right," and turned toward the door. Dalton nodded proudly. Feeling he had done his job, he even said loudly, "We have to maintain certain standards here." Making sure everyone heard him, the security guard opened the door. Marcus stepped outside. The bright sunlight hit his face, and he stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass walls of the showroom behind them. He could still see Dalton smiling at another customer, pretending nothing had happened. A soft wind passed, and Marcus felt his anger fade into something calmer. Deeper, he wasn't broken, just disappointed. He looked down at his old shoes, the same ones he wore when he first started his small company. The shoes that carried him through long days and longer nights. He had built something from nothing. But men like Dalton never looked close enough to see that. They only saw what was on the surface. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands didn't shake. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Yes, I'm here. I'll wait outside," he said quietly. He hung up and leaned against a streetlight. Watching cars pass by, he noticed the security guard glancing at him through the glass as if making sure he didn't cause trouble. Marcus almost smiled because he knew that soon. Everything was about to change. Minutes passed, and the sound of engines grew louder. The security guard frowned, wondering why 3 black luxury cars were stopping right in front of the dealership. People walking by turned to look. Dalton inside adjusted his tie, trying to look confident as he noticed something strange happening outside. Marcus stayed still, his face calm, his eyes steady. He looked through the glass at Dalton and thought, "Let's see who you smile at now." Inside the showroom, the mood was still light. Music played softly, and salesmen laughed at small jokes. But that peace wouldn't last long. Dalton didn't know it yet. But the man he had just humiliated was not just another customer. He was someone whose life, connections, and quiet strength would soon shake the pride out of every person inside that showroom. Marcus took one last breath of the warm morning air and turned toward the road, waiting for the next car door to open. His calm expression hid a storm of memories, of years of hard work, sacrifice, and silence. He had faced worse in life, but this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about showing truth, not with anger, but with dignity. And soon, everyone inside that shiny building was going to see who Marcus really was. The man they dismissed, the man they underestimated, the man whose story would soon make the whole city talk. Marcus stood by the sidewalk, the glass doors of Prestige Motors reflecting his calm face back at him. His phone buzzed again and he picked it up slowly. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm still outside." The voice on the other end replied, "All right, we're close." Marcus hung up and put the phone away. His heart wasn't angry. It was steady. He had learned long ago that silence sometimes spoke louder than shouting. Cars passed by in a blur of color and sound. People moved around him, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen on that quiet street. Marcus glanced once more at the luxury showroom, where the manager, Mr. Dalton, now laughed with another customer. Dalton had already forgotten about him. He had wiped the memory away like dust from a mirror. Inside, the staff smiled, offered drinks, and carried on with their fake politeness. But in a few minutes, their world would twist upside down. A distant roar echoed down the street. It wasn't loud yet, but it was smooth and deep, the kind of sound only made by engines that cost more than most homes. Heads turned as 3 black luxury sedans glided down the road, moving in perfect formation. The sunlight danced on their polished bodies, and people nearby stopped to stare. The cars pulled up right in front of Prestige Motors, engines humming like lions at rest. Dalton noticed through the glass, his eyebrows lifting, his salesman instinct kicking in. He straightened his jacket, whispering to a junior staff member, "Look sharp. Someone important just arrived." He hurried toward the door, already wearing his best fake smile, the kind of smile that only appears when money walks in. The security guard opened the door quickly, ready to welcome whoever stepped out. The first car door opened, and a tall chauffeur in a black uniform stepped out. He walked to the second car, opened that door with a slight bow, and out stepped a woman dressed in white, elegant and confident. Her posture alone drew every eye in the showroom. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a slow drumbeat of authority. She didn't glance at anyone, not even at Dalton, who was already rushing forward to greet her. Dalton's smile widened. "Welcome, madam, to Prestige Motors. It's an honor to have you here," he said smoothly. She didn't answer. Her dark sunglasses reflected the bright morning. Behind her, another bodyguard opened the third car door, and out stepped Marcus, the same man Dalton had kicked out only 15 minutes earlier. Dalton froze, his words catching in his throat. For a second, he thought his mind was playing tricks. Marcus stood straight, his expression calm as always. The woman turned to him with a small smile, as if reassuring him that everything was fine. People nearby stared in confusion. Whispers started again, but this time they carried a different tone, curiosity mixed with tension. The same security guard who had escorted Marcus out now shifted nervously by the door, unsure if he should step back or salute. Dalton blinked several times, trying to find his voice. Sir, madam, is there something I can help you with?" His voice trembled slightly. The woman finally took off her sunglasses, her eyes sharp and full of quiet fire. She looked at him for a long second before saying, "Yes, there is something." "You just threw my husband out of your store?" The words hit like a thunderclap. The entire showroom went silent, every sound, footsteps, typing, even breathing seemed to stop. Dalton's face lost color instantly. His mouth opened, then closed again. The other employees looked at each other in disbelief. One of them whispered, "Her husband." The woman crossed her arms, her presence filling the entire room like a storm that couldn't be contained. Marcus stepped forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity. He looked around the showroom, the same shiny floor, the same polished cars, the same people who had turned away earlier. He didn't say a word yet. He didn't need to. His calmness itself was powerful. The woman beside him turned to the sales team and said coldly, "I came to make a purchase today, but I think I'll be taking my business elsewhere." Dalton panicked, his hands trembling slightly. "No, please, madam. This must be some misunderstanding," he stammered. "If I had known," she cut him off sharply. "If you had known he was rich?" "You mean?" Her voice echoed through the showroom. Every person inside felt the weight of those words. Marcus looked down slightly, remembering how quickly kindness disappears when someone doesn't look important enough. Outside, people began gathering by the windows, recording the scene through the glass. They didn't know the full story, but the tension was magnetic. Within minutes, phones were up, cameras flashing. The staff didn't know what to do. Dalton wiped sweat from his forehead and tried to speak again. "Please, sir, But Marcus finally raised his hand gently. Stopping him mid-sentence, Marcus spoke softly, his voice steady. "You don't need to explain," he said. "You already showed me how you see people. I just hope you'll think before judging the next person who walks through those doors." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the music playing in the background had stopped. Marcus turned to his wife, who nodded slightly. Then both of them began to walk back toward the cars. Dalton stood frozen, his pride shattered. His perfect showroom suddenly felt smaller, colder outside as Marcus reached the car door. He looked over his shoulder once, his eyes calm and strong. He didn't glare, he didn't smile. He just gave a look that said everything words couldn't. The engine started again, low and powerful. The doors closed, and in seconds, the three cars rolled away smoothly, leaving behind silence and shame. Inside, no one moved for a long time. Mr. Dalton stood still, his reflection staring back at him from the glass window. Pale and broken in just a few minutes, he had learned a lesson no business school could ever teach. Respect costs nothing, but losing it can cost everything. And Marcus, the man he once dismissed, had just walked away as the most powerful person in that room, without ever raising his voice. The engines of the three black cars faded into the distance, leaving the glass walls of Prestige Motors trembling with silence. Everyone inside stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to speak. The customers who had once smiled politely now whispered in disbelief. Even the hum of air conditioning seemed too loud in the heavy air. Mr. Dalton stood near the main desk, his palms sweating, his thoughts spinning like wheels in the mud. He couldn't believe what just happened. Marcus, the man he had thrown out so easily, was married to one of the wealthiest women in the city. Her name now echoed in his mind. Naomi Lancaster, CEO of the Lancaster Group, the luxury empire that supplied high-end parts to car companies around the world. Including his own dealership, Dalton felt his throat dry up as realization hit him. He hadn't just insulted a man. He had insulted a brand that could crush Prestige Motors overnight. Outside, the world moved fast. Social media already exploded with videos. Clips of the scene had spread within minutes. Hashtags appeared. Prestige Motor Scandal. Respect everyone. Naomi and Marcus. People online weren't kind. Comments poured in from across the city, calling out the arrogance of the showroom and praising Marcus for his calm dignity. But Dalton didn't know that yet. Inside, he tried to hold on to the last bits of his pride. Minutes later, the heavy doors opened again. Every head turned, expecting customers, but what they saw made the tension worse. Naomi walked back in, her expression unreadable. Two men in dark suits followed her. They carried sleek folders and serious faces. Dalton straightened immediately, his heart pounding in his chest. "Madam Lancaster," he said quickly, his voice shaking. "I truly apologize. It was all a misunderstanding." She raised her hand, cutting him off, her voice calm but sharp. "A misunderstanding?" she said quietly. "You judged a man without even asking his name." Her words sliced through the silence like a blade. One of the men beside her opened a folder and placed a document on the counter. Dalton glanced at it and his stomach dropped. It was a termination notice for his management position. Signed by the regional board, Naomi continued. "Prestige Motors is partly funded through my company's partnership program," she said. "I've already spoken to the directors. They agreed this place needs new leadership." Dalton's face turned white. The room started spinning around him, his voice cracked. "Madam, please. I have worked here for 10 years. But Naomi's eyes didn't soften. "Then you should have learned respect by now," she replied coldly. The other employees stood stiff, unsure what to do. No one dared to speak in Dalton's defense. He looked around for help, but all he saw were blank faces. People who had once admired him now pretended not to know him. His confidence, the same arrogance that had fueled him moments ago, crumbled right there on the shiny marble floor. Then, to everyone's surprise, Marcus entered once more, not with anger, but with quiet purpose. His presence alone calmed the tension. He looked at Dalton, who could barely meet his eyes. Naomi turned slightly toward her husband, as if waiting to see what he would say. But Marcus didn't speak right away. He just looked around the room, at the same faces that had judged him earlier, at the same cars that had seemed so unreachable. Finally, Marcus said softly, "I didn't want anyone to lose their job." His tone was gentle. "I only wanted to be treated like any other customer." Dalton swallowed hard, his eyes filling with shame. I was wrong," he said in a broken voice. "I misjudged you, sir." But Marcus shook his head slowly. "You didn't misjudge me," he said. "You misjudged yourself." Those words hit harder than any punishment. They stripped away every excuse Dalton had left. Naomi watched quietly, then placed a hand on Marcus's arm. Her expression softened slightly. "You always forgive too easily," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "That's how change starts," he said. His calmness seemed to fill the whole showroom for the first time. People weren't just seeing a rich couple. They were seeing two human beings who stood for dignity and grace. Dalton took a slow step back, realizing this was the end of his career at Prestige Motors. Yet deep inside, he knew he would remember this moment forever. As Marcus turned to leave again, a few employees quickly opened the doors for him, not out of fear but out of respect. Even the customers who had watched silently before now nodded slightly, their eyes filled with quiet admiration. Outside, cameras flashed as Marcus and Naomi stepped into their car. The crowd cheered softly. People were already shouting, "That's the couple from the video!" But Marcus didn't wave or smile. He just placed his hand over his heart and gave a small nod to the people watching. It wasn't a moment of fame for him. It was a moment of truth. Inside the showroom, Dalton stood alone. His reflection in the glass looked pale and older than before. The once confident manager now looked like a shadow of himself. He whispered to no one, "I only saw what I wanted to see," his own words echoing Marcus's lesson back at him. As the cars drove away once again, the employees whispered quietly among themselves. One of them said, "He didn't raise his voice once," another replied. "That's real strength." The story of that day would travel across the city, spreading from mouth to mouth, from phone to phone, a story not about cars or money, but about respect, and about how one quiet man changed an entire room without shouting a single word. And as the sun began to set over the glass building of Prestige Motors, it reflected not pride or luxury anymore, but a quiet reminder that true worth isn't worn, it's shown. And the man they had once removed now stood forever in their memories, not as a customer, but as a lesson they would never forget. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the city like gold, washing over rooftops, windows, and the tall glass face of Prestige Motors. Reporters and curious onlookers gathered outside the luxury car showroom, snapping pictures, recording videos, and whispering excitedly. Overnight, Marcus and Naomi's story had spread like wildfire. The clip of the manager throwing Marcus out and later realizing who he was had gone viral across the internet. Everyone was talking about it. The man who stayed calm in humiliation, and the woman whose silence carried more power than anger. Inside the showroom, chaos replaced the old calm. Mr. Dalton sat at his desk, pale and restless, dark circles under his eyes. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from the dealership's headquarters, the PR department, and even journalists demanding a statement. Each call made him sweat more. The headline on every screen was the same. Luxury car manager removes black man, turns pale. When he sees who walks in next, his name was all over social media. His reputation in ruins, the comments were brutal. People mocked his arrogance. Others praised Marcus for his quiet strength. Dalton tried to sip his coffee, but his hands shook too much. The sip spilled down his sleeve. He cursed under his breath. The showroom that once smelled of success now smelled of fear. Staff whispered when he passed by, and no one met his eyes for the first time. He felt small in a place that had always made him feel powerful. Around noon, the doors opened again and a tall man in a gray suit entered. Dalton recognized him instantly. It was Mr. Hughes, the regional director, a man who rarely visited in person. The room froze as he walked in, his expression serious. "Dalton," he said flatly, "we need to talk." They went into the back office, and the sound of the door closing felt like a final judgment. Hughes laid down a printed document. Dalton didn't need to read it to know what it was. "You've brought disgrace to this company," Hughes said coldly. "Do you realize who that man was?" Dalton swallowed hard. "Yes. Now I do," he whispered. "He's Naomi Lancaster's husband." Hughes nodded. "Exactly. And her company supplies half of our premium models' custom interiors. She's pulled her partnership from us this morning. We've already lost millions in pending orders." Dalton's heart sank. I can fix this, he pleaded. I'll apologize publicly. I'll reach out to them personally. But Hughes shook his head. It's too late, he said. You didn't just insult a client, Dalton. You insulted humanity itself. Dalton felt his chest tighten, his throat dry, his voice trembling. I thought I was protecting the showroom's image, he said. Hughes cut him off. He looked human. Dalton, just like you, just like me, and you couldn't see past your prejudice. The words hit him harder than he expected, and for a moment Dalton had nothing left to say. He just lowered his head outside the office. The staff could hear muffled voices. They exchanged uneasy glances. Rumors spread that Dalton was being dismissed. When the door finally opened, he walked out slowly, holding a small envelope and looking like a man who had aged 10 years in one night. No one dared to speak. He walked past the same floor where Marcus had stood yesterday, past the same car he had once guarded so proudly, and now all he could see was the reflection of his own shame. Later that afternoon, Marcus and Naomi appeared on a live interview, sitting together in their modest home, not the mansion people expected, but a simple, elegant space filled with warmth. The host asked Marcus, "Why didn't you get angry? Why didn't you confront him?" Marcus smiled gently and replied, "Because anger wouldn't change his heart, but silence might make him hear his own words." The host nodded. Visibly moved, Naomi added softly, "Sometimes people forget that kindness doesn't mean weakness. My husband showed strength by staying calm." Across the city, people watched the interview, and comments flooded in again. But this time they weren't angry. They were inspired. Teachers discussed the story in classrooms. Companies used it in ethics meetings. Even newspapers abroad printed headlines about the gentleman who taught the world a lesson without saying a word. Marcus's name became a symbol, a reminder that respect shouldn't depend on wealth, clothes, or color. Back at Prestige Motors, the regional board gathered. They announced a new policy on inclusion and customer treatment. They even decided to hang a framed poster near the entrance with the words, "Judge character, not appearance." Underneath the line was a small quote from Marcus, "See the person, not the profile." It became the first thing every employee saw when they entered. Dalton, meanwhile, walked out of the building for the last time. The afternoon sun hit his face. The same light that had once made him feel confident now made him feel exposed. He looked up at the giant sign of Prestige Motors one last time and whispered, "I deserve this," then turned and walked away across the street. A young man scrolling on his phone whispered to his friend, "That's the guy from the viral video." The friend looked up. "Really? The one who kicked out the CEO's husband?" Dalton heard them but didn't react. He just kept walking. Slower now, quieter, somewhere far away. Marcus sat on his porch, watching the sunset with Naomi beside him. She looked at him and said softly, "Do you think he'll ever learn?" Marcus smiled faintly. "He already started the moment he felt ashamed," he said. "And that's all that matters." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying away the noise of the city, leaving behind only peace. That night, millions around the world rewatched the video again, not for the scandal, but for the calm, for the silent strength of one man who turned humiliation into humanity. And in the glow of their screens, people began to see what Prestige Motors had failed to see: the quiet power of respect, the beauty of patience, and the priceless worth of every single person, no matter what they wear or where they come from. Days passed after the scandal, but the storm didn't fade, it only grew louder. The clip of Marcus being humiliated and the manager's pale reaction had crossed oceans. It played on morning shows, talk shows, and even appeared in headlines like, "The man who shamed arrogance with silence." People everywhere were talking about it. Schools discussed it, business leaders quoted it, and for once, the world wasn't talking about anger. They were talking about grace. Marcus had returned to his quiet life. He didn't chase fame, he didn't post online. He simply went back to work, running his small but growing logistics company, the same one he had built from scratch years ago. His phone kept buzzing with reporters, offers for interviews, sponsorships, even motivational speaking gigs, but he refused them all. When his assistant asked him why, he just smiled and said, "The lesson is already out there. I don't need to speak louder than it." Naomi, however, knew her husband's silence carried more power than any camera. She had watched him face humiliation without anger, then dignity without pride. She wanted the world to remember that. So one morning she made a decision. She called her media team and said, "Let's do something positive with this." Within days, she launched a new campaign called See Beyond the Surface, a global movement aimed at promoting respect, equality, and human empathy across workplaces, schools, and service industries. The campaign's first ad opened with real footage from the showroom, the moment Marcus stood silently while being escorted out. But it faded into his smile later. When he walked back in beside his wife, a voiceover said, "You never know who you're turning away, but you always know what kind of person you are." The video broke records. Viewed over 50 million times in its first week, Prestige Motors' new management reached out publicly, apologizing again and pledging to adopt the campaign in all its global stores. But the internet didn't forget easily. The brand's logo had become a symbol of shallow judgment. To rebuild trust, they needed more than apologies. They needed to act, so they invited Marcus and Naomi to a private meeting, hoping to work together on corporate ethics programs. At first Marcus refused, but Naomi convinced him. "You don't have to go for them," she said. "Go for the message. Let people see what forgiveness looks like." Marcus agreed quietly, and a few days later, he found himself standing once more in front of Prestige Motors, the same glass building where it all began. The media waited outside, cameras flashing, but Marcus didn't look nervous. His calm eyes reflected peace inside the new CEO. A young woman named Claire greeted them warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster," she said, "thank you for giving us this chance." Marcus nodded. "Let's make sure no one else feels the way I did that day," he replied softly. The meeting went long, but it ended with something beautiful. A joint pledge signed by both companies, promising to implement strict equality training, fair hiring practices, and empathy education in all branches. As Marcus walked out of the boardroom, some of the same employees who had once looked away now stood near the entrance. Waiting? They smiled nervously, unsure if he would even acknowledge them. But Marcus did something no one expected. He stopped, looked around, and said quietly, "Thank you for learning." It wasn't sarcastic, it was genuine. His kindness once again disarmed everyone in the room. Outside, journalists swarmed him with questions. "Do you forgive the manager?" One asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." Another asked, "Do you think people will change?" Marcus paused, then said, "They will, if someone gives them the chance." The crowd went silent for a second before the sound of cameras and clapping filled the air. That night, social media was once again filled with Marcus's words. But now it wasn't about anger or shame. It was about hope. His quotes flooded every platform. "Forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. And a kind heart changes more than harsh words ever will." Teachers printed those lines on classroom walls. Companies added them to training slides. Even small shops hung signs inspired by him. Meanwhile, Mr. Dalton, the former manager, watched all of this from his small apartment. He had lost his job, his confidence, and many friends who had once admired his success. But he couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's calm face. He replayed that moment in his mind every night. The quiet way Marcus said, "You already showed me how you see people." It haunted him, but it also started to change him. He began volunteering at community centers, helping people find jobs, even mentoring young workers about humility and respect. One evening, while locking up the small charity office he now worked at, Dalton looked up and saw a news billboard glowing across the street. It showed Marcus and Naomi smiling together under the campaign logo.
See beyond the surface. Dalton stood there for a long moment,
then smiled faintly to himself. "I guess he really did change me," he whispered. Back at home, Marcus sat on the porch again with Naomi, their hands intertwined. The wind was soft, the stars bright. Naomi leaned on his shoulder and said, "Do you realize how many lives you've touched without even trying?" Marcus chuckled quietly. "I didn't touch anyone," he said. "They just saw who they already could be." She smiled, because she knew that was exactly what made him different. Far away, in cities they would never visit, people told the story of Marcus, the man who was thrown out of a luxury car showroom, stayed calm, and turned that moment into a global message of humanity. It wasn't just about race or class or pride anymore. It was about something deeper, something timeless. It was about what it means to stay gentle in a cruel world, and how one quiet man reminded millions that real luxury isn't a car or a name. It's kindness, and the courage to show it when the world expects you to break. Weeks later, the world had moved on to new headlines, but the story of Marcus still lingered in the corners of people's hearts. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It had become a mirror showing people who they really were. The campaign See Beyond the Surface had turned into a global movement. Posters appeared in airports, malls, and schools, showing Marcus's calm face beside the quote, "Respect is free, but it changes everything." Corporations used it in training videos, celebrities reposted it online. Even teachers read it to their students. Marcus, however, remained humble. His life hadn't changed much on the surface. He still drove the same modest car, worked in his office, and enjoyed quiet dinners with Naomi. Yet everywhere he went, strangers recognized him. Some thanked him, some cried. Some said his story gave them courage, and every time, Marcus smiled politely and said the same thing. "I just did what felt right." But while the world celebrated his calm strength, Marcus carried a different weight inside. The memory of humiliation hadn't vanished. It had only transformed. Sometimes late at night, he replayed the moment when the manager told him to leave. The coldness in that voice, the stares, the silence. It still echoed in his mind like a small scar that would never fully heal. Naomi noticed those quiet moments. When his eyes drifted away and she would gently say, "You didn't lose that day. You taught?" He would smile faintly, but deep down, he knew some wounds didn't fade, they just turned into wisdom. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Marcus's office. Plain white envelope, no company logo, just his name written neatly across the front. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short handwritten note. "I owe you more than an apology. You gave me back my conscience, thank you. Marcus Dalton." Marcus read it twice. His chest tightening, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long time before whispering softly, "Good." Naomi found him later that evening, still holding the note. She smiled when she read it. "Looks like your silence spoke after all," she said. Meanwhile, Dalton had started a new chapter in his life. After months of reflection, he joined a community program helping unemployed youth learn business ethics. He stood in front of small groups, telling them his story without hiding anything. "I was that man," he would say, "the one who judged someone by how they looked, and it cost me everything." His honesty touched people. He wasn't proud, but he was real, and that made his lessons powerful. He often told them about Marcus, the man he wronged but who never raised his voice. "He taught me that dignity doesn't need noise," Dalton would say, his voice shaking slightly back in the city. Naomi was invited to a global leadership summit to speak about equality in business. During her speech, she said, "Prejudice isn't just cruelty, it's blindness. And my husband showed the world what sight really means." The crowd stood and applauded. Clips of her speech went viral again, showing how Marcus's story had now become bigger than both of them. It had become a movement for empathy. One evening, as Marcus walked home from work, he passed by a bus stop. An old man sat there reading a newspaper. On the front page was a story about Dalton's new charity work. The old man noticed Marcus glancing at it and said, "That man changed, can you believe it?" Marcus smiled gently and replied, "Yes, I can." The man nodded and said, "I wish the world had more people like the one who changed him." Marcus chuckled. "The world already does," he said softly, then continued walking. When Marcus returned home, Naomi was on the balcony watering her plants. She looked up and said, "You saw the news?" He nodded. "Dalton's helping kids now," she said. "I never thought I'd see that." Marcus walked over, took the watering can from her and replied, "People surprise you when you give them the chance." She smiled and rested her head against his shoulder. Together they watched the sunset, warm light painting their faces with gold. As the months rolled by, the movement continued to grow beyond their control. Schools taught the Marcus lesson. Companies added empathy training inspired by his story. And thousands of people sent letters saying how his calmness had inspired them to handle their own struggles differently. Marcus read some of them at night, and one line from a young girl stuck with him. "I didn't shout back when they bullied me, because I remembered your story and they stopped." That night, Marcus sat quietly by the window, looking out at the dark sky full of stars. He thought about how strange life could be, how one painful moment of injustice could turn into something beautiful, how a single choice, to stay kind instead of cruel, could ripple through millions of lives. Naomi walked in with 2 cups of tea. She set one beside him and said, "You know, I think your silence changed the world." He laughed softly. "If it did, it's because people were finally ready to listen." Outside, the city glowed, cars passed, lights flickered, and somewhere out there, people were still sharing his story. Not for entertainment, but for hope, and in that quiet night, Marcus realized something he hadn't before. That real change doesn't come from power or wealth. It comes from the courage to stay gentle in the face of cruelty, the strength to forgive when the world tells you to hate, and the grace to stand tall when others expect you to fall. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled. Because in the end, he knew one truth that no scandal or fame could ever erase. Kindness was still humanity's most priceless luxury, and he had proved it without ever raising his voice. A few months later, the echoes of that one unforgettable day still rippled through the city. Marcus's story had become part of daily conversation, used in classrooms, retold in churches, quoted by politicians, and shared by parents with their children. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a timeless lesson about the strength of humility. But Marcus never saw himself as a hero to him. It was just one choice made on one difficult morning. Yet the world saw it differently. His calm defiance against arrogance had touched hearts far beyond his imagination. Naomi often received letters from strangers, teachers, security guards, CEOs, each telling how the story changed them. "He made me think before I judged someone," one said. Another read, "He made me want to be better." One chilly evening, as the city lights flickered, Marcus and Naomi were invited to a charity gala honoring people who made a difference without violence or revenge. Naomi wore an elegant silver dress. Marcus chose a simple black suit, nothing flashy as they entered the ballroom. People turned to look. Applause filled the room before they even reached the stage. But Marcus looked embarrassed, whispering to Naomi, "I'm not used to being the story." She smiled. "You're not the story," she said softly. "You're the example." The event host, a warm-voiced woman, began the ceremony by saying, "Sometimes it takes just one calm heart to silence the noise of the world." She gestured toward Marcus, who stood shyly. Naomi nudged him to speak reluctantly. He walked to the microphone. The crowd went silent, cameras pointed at him. But Marcus didn't read from paper. He just spoke from his heart. "I'm no different from anyone else," he said. "That day I was hurt, yes. But I realized something important. People don't see you for who you are until you make them. Not with anger, but with truth." The audience listened in stillness. "If I had shouted, he would have remembered my anger," Marcus continued. "But because I stayed calm, he remembered my humanity." A long pause followed before thunderous applause filled the hall. Outside news cameras caught every word. Within hours, the speech spread across social media. Headlines read, "Marcus speaks humanity over hatred." The internet once again celebrated him. But this time it wasn't for the viral clip. It was for the message that followed it. After the event, Marcus stepped outside for air. The night was cool and quiet. A young valet approached him shyly and said, "Sir, I watched your video months ago. I used to treat people differently." "I don't anymore." Marcus smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's all the change we ever need," he said. The boy nodded with tears in his eyes. Later that night as they drove home, Naomi looked out the window. The city glowed beneath them like a sea of stars. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that this all happened for a reason?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Everything does," he said. "Even pain can be a teacher if you let it." She nodded, her hand finding his. "You taught people that power doesn't need to shout," she said softly. He chuckled. "Power doesn't last," he replied, "but kindness does." Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Dalton watched the broadcast of the gala from his small apartment. The light from the screen flickered against his face. He listened to Marcus's words carefully, and for the first time in years, he felt a strange peace. He whispered quietly, "He forgave me before I even asked." It wasn't guilt anymore, it was gratitude. The next morning, Dalton visited the small youth center where he volunteered. The walls were decorated with posters from Marcus's campaign. One read, "You don't have to be powerful to change the world. Just kind," Dalton smiled. He gathered the group of young volunteers and said, "Today, I want to tell you about a man named Marcus." And somewhere miles away, Marcus sat in his quiet office, drinking his morning coffee, the sunlight pouring in. His phone buzzed with another invitation to speak at the United Nations about equality and human values. He stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. "It's not my voice they need," he murmured. "It's the message," Naomi, standing at the door, said gently. "Then go share it." He looked up at her, his eyes full of warmth. "All right," he said, "but I'll tell them one thing, that the strongest man in any room is the one who chooses respect." Outside, the city moved like always. unaware that somewhere in its heart, a single man's quiet dignity had changed the rhythm of how people saw each other. And in that silence between moments, in the space between humiliation and grace, the world had finally learned what true luxury really meant. Not wealth, not fame, but humanity. The kind that stands firm, forgives deep, and never forgets to see the person behind the face. Months passed, and the world began to heal from its endless noise of anger and division. Yet one story refused to fade, the quiet story of a man who turned humiliation into hope. Marcus never wanted to be remembered as a symbol, but people everywhere still spoke his name with respect. His story was now told in schools, shared in workplaces, and printed in books about leadership and kindness. He had unknowingly become a teacher to millions, not through speeches or fame, but through silence and grace. One crisp morning, Marcus woke early before sunrise, the sky painted in pale orange. He sat on the porch with a cup of tea in his hand. Naomi joined him, wrapping a soft shawl around her shoulders. The world outside was calm, birds singing, streets quiet, no cameras, no reporters, just peace. "It feels like everything has changed," Naomi said softly. Marcus nodded. "It has," he replied, "but maybe the world needed to." She smiled faintly. "And you were the spark," he shook his head. "No, I was just a reminder," he said. "People already knew right from wrong, they just forgot to feel it." Later that week, Marcus and Naomi traveled to a small town for the opening of a youth center, built under the See Beyond the Surface initiative. The center's walls were painted with murals of people from different backgrounds, holding hands, laughing together. On one wall, there was a simple painting of Marcus standing beside the quote that had defined his life. "Respect is free, but it changes everything." He stood before it silently for a moment. Overwhelmed, children ran up to him asking for pictures. One little boy tugged on his sleeve and said, "Mister, my teacher told us you're the man who stayed kind when someone was mean." Marcus smiled gently, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "Kindness isn't about them," he said softly. "It's about who you are." The boy grinned wide and ran off laughing. Naomi watched with tears in her eyes inside the hall. A crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The mayor introduced Marcus and Naomi, calling them the heartbeat of a movement. But Marcus didn't like speeches. When they handed him the microphone, he said only, "I'm not special. I just didn't want to lose my humanity." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then applause rose like thunder, not for a celebrity, but for a man who reminded everyone that goodness still mattered. Outside, news crews recorded the moment, and later that evening the footage aired worldwide, showing Marcus cutting the ribbon beside laughing children. The headline read, "From rejection to redemption, the man who taught the world to see." People shared it online again, writing comments like, "I wish I could be that calm," and "He made kindness look strong." That night, as Marcus and Naomi drove home, the city lights glowed like scattered stars. Naomi looked out the window and whispered, "Do you ever wonder how far this will go?" Marcus smiled. "It's already gone far enough," he said. "Because if even one person treats another better tomorrow, that's enough for me." When they reached home, Marcus sat by the window, staring out at the moon. The world felt lighter now, quieter. He thought about Dalton, about that day in the showroom, about the eyes that judged him, and the silence that changed everything. He realized that forgiveness had done more than heal him. It had healed others too. In another part of the city, Dalton closed the youth center after a long day. His hands dusty with paint from fixing a classroom wall, he paused by the door and whispered, "Thank you." Marcus, he didn't mean for anyone to hear, but somehow, the wind carried the words into the night. Back on the porch, Naomi leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. "You changed the world, you know," she said softly. Marcus chuckled. "No, love," he whispered. "The world just listened for once." The stars shimmered above them, silent witnesses to the ripple that had begun in a single act of quiet dignity. And so the story ended, not with revenge, not with victory, but with understanding. The man once thrown out of a showroom had reminded humanity of its greatest truth, that real worth can't be seen in clothes, color, or wealth. It lives in compassion and grows in forgiveness. And as the night deepened, a gentle wind passed through the trees, carrying a message into the world. That kindness is the one luxury no one can ever take away. And Marcus, the man who chose grace over pride, would forever be remembered not for what he owned, but for what he gave back, his humanity.